I want to begin my remarks for this evening by quoting a famous political theorist, political activist during the Revolutionary War period in America, who is the author of the very famous pamphlet of less than 50 pages, Common Sense. I'm talking about Thomas Paine. And here's what Thomas Paine wrote. In America, we have no king. The law is king. And yesterday, we witnessed this crucial component of American society, and we saw it prevail once again with the indictment of former President Donald Trump. That no one is beyond the reach of the law. Now, it's important to offer a caveat, and that is, this is an indictment, and as one attorney said, an indictment is nothing but a piece of paper. It's not a conviction. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty, and in our system, the proving of guilt rests solely with the prosecutors. But in an environment of mutual recrimination and accusation, an environment in which we witness the chaos of our politics and the ultra-corrosive partisanship, we are now about to witness a test of our democratic maturity. And I'm using the word democratic with a small d. This is not another partisan effort. A test of our democratic maturity. Can we follow due process? Can we reach beyond partisan passions and abide by the rule of law? Does the rule of law and judicial process, which has neither fear nor favor, does it now live in America, or is it on a respirator? Indeed, is law king, or is the king law? And tonight, I think it's important for us, and I hope useful at this time, to spend a few moments describing what our Jewish tradition has to say about these matters. Specifically, I want to talk about three concepts that are involved in this process. And that is the Jewish views of justice, the Jewish view of the separation of powers, and the Jewish view of law as it may function in a healthy society. First, I want to talk a bit about justice. And as you may well imagine, there are several different kinds of justice. There's distributive justice, in which we care about the equal distribution of the goods of society across the spectrum of citizenship, distributive justice. There's retributive justice, that those who have violated the law be punished for their crime. There is also transformational justice, seeing justice as a vehicle for the transforming of society closer to its ideals and its aspirations. I want to talk a bit about the idea of justice as fairness. Justice as the equitable and fair treatment of individuals. That people should receive what they deserve by means of a fair and impartial set of processes. Justice is indeed one of Judaism's key ideas. I quote from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall not show partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Now, this is a kind of an exalted set of aspirations, but notice that behind it is a kind of skepticism about the vacillations and the weaknesses of human nature. This passage is trying to neutralize those vacillations and weaknesses. Let me read it again. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall take no bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. And as this passage continues in Hebrew, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And the rabbis ask, on the assumption of what we might call the economy of divine expression, which means that God, just to make the assumption at this point that God wrote the Torah, that God wastes no words. God is economical in the writing of the Torah, and therefore when we have a contradiction, it must be only an apparent contradiction. I don't mean contradiction, I mean something repetitive. When we find a repetition and looks superfluous, why say something twice that you've said once? It's not in fact superfluous, but renders a deeper meaning. Justice, justice you shall pursue, which the rabbis understand as you shall pursue justice with zeal, with alacrity. Justice, I mean justice, you shall pursue as a kind of foundation for the social good. Let me quote from the prophet Amos. I loathe, I spurn your festivals. I'm not appeased by your solemn assemblies. If you offer burnt offerings or your meal offerings, I will not accept them. I will pay no heed to your gifts of fatlings. Spare me the sound of your hymns. Let me not hear the music of your lutes, but let justice well up as waters, righteousness as an unfailing stream. The intense commitment to the ideal of justice in Amos, almost a poetic evocation of it. Think of Abraham's great conversation with God when God in chapter 18 of Genesis is intending to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we might think of a person of faith bowing to the wishes of the authority. And if God says, I'm going to do X, all we have to do is to bow in obeisance and say, Amen. Abraham does not do this, as many of you know. Now let's just think for a moment about who Abraham is. Abraham is the first. What does it mean to be the first? It means the first in time. Abraham is the first Israelite to be called. But if you think about the way in which, say, the system of arithmetic unfolds, what is first are not the theorems, but the axioms, the foundations of the system, which then generate the system. The axioms may not be first in time, but they're first in importance. Abraham here is not just the first in time. Abraham becomes, through a careful reading, the model, the exemplar of what the tradition of which he is the beginning is grounded in. And so when Abraham challenges God at Sodom and Gomorrah, the discussion about Sodom and Gomorrah, he is not only taking God on, but he is telling us one of the great foundations of our tradition. And he challenges God about God's desire to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And then he says something that is quite preposterous on its face. Shall not the just one do what is just. You, God, your essence is justice. Your concern is for justice. How can you act in contradiction to who you are? This is what we might call the Promethean moment in Abraham's life, when in a certain way he storms the heavens, though he is loyal to this God. But Abraham is also telling us something about the intensity with which our tradition pursues justice and cares about justice. And in our society, justice is sought by judicial processes. I want to talk next about our tradition's commitment to the separation of powers, one of the foundations of the American system. In the book of Deuteronomy, the author lists 4 different offices. There are judges, there are kings, there are priests, and there are prophets. And one commentator makes the following claim: prominence is given to the limits on the rights of each authority. Each authority limits the authority of the others. Separation of powers already back in biblical days. Prominence is given to the limits on the rights of each authority to prevent the development of a single strong focus on prestige and power. Also an attempt to curb, to limit the depredations of human nature. All 4 of these offices are listed in Deuteronomy chapters 16 and 17, and I want to look briefly at 2 of them: the judicial branch and the monarchy. First of all, from Deuteronomy chapter 16, you shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. We ought to pause on this translation, due justice. The Hebrew is mishpat tzedek, righteous justice, real justice. I mean justice. When the Israelites, in their trek across the wilderness to the Promised Land, confront Moses with the desire to return to Egypt, where they had no freedom but a life of comfort, the Torah says something interesting about them, what they want. The Torah says that they desire. They want to return to Egypt. Here we have a kind of repetition, do justice, D-U-E, in order to underline once again the power and importance of justice. You shall not judge unfairly, you shall show no partiality, you shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Let's look for a moment at one of the other offices, an office that has some echoes in our own day, the office of the king. What does Deuteronomy say about the CV of the king? What are the king's duties? What does the king have to do? And here I'm going to read to you from chapter 17 of Deuteronomy. I think you will be quite astonished by what Deuteronomy says here. If after you have entered the land that the Lord your God has assigned you, and taken possession of it and settled it, that you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. Well, in that case, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by the Lord your God. Be sure to set this king as king over yourself, one of your own people, Don't set a foreigner over you. Moreover, and here come some of his duties, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. Since the Lord has warned you, don't go back there. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray. Nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. In other words, his CV, his list of duties, are all the things that he should not do. He spends his days not doing these things because the power of the king is dangerous. So let's put a wall, a fence around the king. Oh, here is one thing that the king should do. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching, this Torah, written for him on a scroll by the Levites. Let it remain with him. Let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus will he not act haughtily toward his fellow or deviate from the destruction to the right or to the left. In other words, the king has one positive duty. After breakfast, maybe he's taken a little nap, he should take out his Torah and spend the day reading it so that he knows what the purpose of being a king is. Here the Torah puts it in theistic language, that he should serve God. Let's think of it more broadly. Let's think of it in terms of a set of ideals. The king is a servant of the ideas, the aspirations of the community. And unless he is engaged in the discipline of studying those ideals and his fealty to it, he is likely to let being king go to his head. You need a leader. But the most important thing about a leader is that the leader recognizes that he is to be led by the aspirations of his society. What about law? Biblical Judaism is a system wherein laws, not people, structure society. And in the 5 books of Moses, there are 3 different law codes. Since they're not comprehensive, we call them collections. One in Exodus, one in Leviticus, one in Deuteronomy. And as is well known, the rabbis in post-biblical Judaism expand mightily and extensively on the laws of the Torah. And we have some very famous law codes. One famous one by Moses Maimonides, by a precursor of Maimonides, Alfasi. We have the famous Shulchan Aruch by Joseph Caro. The word Shulchan Aruch means prepared table. The laws prepare the table for us so that when we come to the table, we know how it is we should comport ourselves. The fork goes here, the glass goes here, different glasses, bewildering number of protocols about things on the table. But that's what the law codes do. They provide order, predictability, a kind of equality, equanimity to society. Now, Judaism has been contrasted largely by those who dislike Judaism, been contrasted with Christianity. Judaism, the canard goes, is a religion of law, whereas Christianity is a religion of love. The great philosopher Immanuel Kant took this idea that Judaism is law so seriously that he said, really, it's not a religion at all. It's just a series of behavioral norms. Yes, indeed, law is ubiquitous in traditional Judaism, but there is also, and this is important, the love of the law, the recognition of the law's power. The great first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rav Kook, said the following: "Just as there are laws of poetry, so there is poetry in the laws." And some of you at some point may have read Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. Montesquieu really is the originator of the very notion of the separation of powers from which the framers of the Constitution borrowed. But notice the title, not just the laws, but the spirit of the laws, the soul of the laws, the aspirations of the laws. In Psalm 19, the psalmist says that laws are sweeter than honey. And so, Judaism is not only based on, in significant degree, law, but on commitment to the law, and the commitment on the aspirations of the law. Tzedek, tzedek, tir dof, we shall pursue law and justice. The search for laws is the search for a just society. I want to go back to the Deuteronomy passage after we've read, "Justice, justice you shall pursue," and then point out something that I think is quite profound and easily missed. "Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you." Now, what this says is, you pursue justice and you will live well on the land. We can understand this in two ways. If I do the right thing, I get a reward. And we know the problems with that line of thinking. My father used to say to me, "If you bring home a great report card, I'll double your allowance." The problem here is there's no intrinsic connection between how well I did in school and how much I get for my allowance. What the Deuteronomist is saying here is not that if you pursue justice, you will live well on the land, but living well is a consequence, a natural, inherent consequence of pursuing justice. This is not reward and punishment. This is the implication of living a life communally in which we pursue justice through law. So, the indictments of Donald Trump give our society an opportunity to do several things: to test the maturity of our democratic system, to test the viability in a hot, passionately partisan age, to test the viability of a system of law, of separation of powers, of the search for justice in America. It's also an opportunity to provide us, our citizens, with a civic lessons. What indeed are the foundations, the true foundations, and the true aspirations of our American experiment? Let's return to them so we see with clarity what it was the founding meant and continues to mean. Or to put it another way, what does America mean at this very difficult period in our history? And I dare say that our Jewish tradition is part of the background, is part of the feel of these questions and those aspirations in its emphasis on justice, on the separations of powers, and of law.